none of what transpired would have happened if I hadn't made a mistake, and I've always taken responsibility for that. And indeed, the night of my sentencing, I said that I was sorry for that.
That's what I'm asking you about. What causes someone like you to lie like that?
The key thing is that when it happened, in 2003, I think like a lot of other people, thought this was a very minor matter, because the AA found 300,000 people.
Sure, but you kept on lying.
No, well, I didn't keep on lying, actually. I wasn't accused of anything until 2011. So there was no question of, this didn't arise. In 2011, what happened is that I was first accused of swapping points with a member of my constituency staff, which was untrue. Then I did lie about it, and the lying was essentially that the consequences of what seemed to be a relatively minor matter a long time ago were so disproportionate, and I knew that they were so disproportionate, that you say, this is something that you're actually going to try and get out of. And that's what I did, and I shouldn't have done it. I should have fessed up initially and said no, but I did, and
There's a difference between filling in a form and doing what you say you've been told many other people have done in taking the points, and making a public declaration that you know to be untrue. What does that feel like?
Well, I think that the key point actually was, and what made me change my mind, was getting into the prospect of court and having to lie under oath, and that I wasn't prepared to do. So I wasn't prepared to perjure myself, and I wasn't prepared either to go into court and have a tremendous battle with my ex-wife.
But lying to the public, lying on camera, wasn't a problem.
Well, the reality is that I didn't look terribly happy doing that, as you probably saw from the clip.
What are we supposed to deduce from your face?
And the reality is that I wasn't, and it was something that I very much regret.
Did you ever have to tell lies as a minister?
No.
So this was an entirely novel experience.
I think it is the case. Well, I wouldn't say that. I think that anybody who tells you that they've never told a lie is almost certainly lying. And I think that I wouldn't dream of putting you on the spot and asking whether you've ever told a lie. But the reality is that white lies, at least, small lies, do help social circumstances and avoid you hurting people's feelings and so forth. And the definition is something that can become more elastic.
In this particular example, was it?
No. And that's exactly why I say the only defence I can make for the behaviour then is essentially that this was something which was going to have such enormous consequences for my family, for me, my career and everything else, that actually, given that it was, after all, not impairing national defence, it was not perjuring yourself in a court, it was actually about sending a form back to a magistrate.
But if we can't trust our legislators, who can we trust?
No, well, it's quite right that lawmakers must not be lawbreakers, and that's why, obviously, when I did plead guilty, I immediately resigned my seat in Parliament. You
go on today in your article for The Guardian to talk about Rupert Murdoch being involved in what happened to you subsequently. Is there any evidence that Murdoch personally had an involvement?
What I say about that is that I say that maybe it's a coincidence, but I give a lot of circumstantial reasons for why...
You suggest very strongly
it might
you were a victim of the Murdoch press.
One of the things that makes me think that this might have been the case, for example, was something actually that came out on Newsnight some time back, which was you interviewed Derek Webb, the police officer who actually, the former police officer, who was actually put on to trailing me and my partner, and he was also, by the way, put on to trailing lawyers in the case who were representing claimants against News International. Now, that's not something that had any public interest. It was purely an issue of News International defending its patch. And I think that when it was confronted, as it was, with an absolutely monstrous set of accusations which had a dramatic effect on its share price, it's now caused the breakup of the company. Rupert Murdoch is actually splitting the newspaper. They were desperate to close this down as much as possible. And I believe that the fact that the News of the World put a very substantial investment into tailing me, it wasn't just a question of voicemail hacking, it was actually a retired police officer. This is expensive. That was something which I think suggests that there was something else going on.
Strong language. You used the verb groomed. You say that the Sunday Times groomed your ex-wife.
Well, there are two episodes.
Why do you use that word?
There are two episodes going on here. First of all, there's this big investment by the News of the World, and there's the fact that they don't use the story until I actually get into the cabinet, and then they decide to use it, even though they already have it on the admission of their former chief reporter. The second thing is when the Sunday Times works at it, they are very, very... I mean, grooming is not an unfair...
It's a very loaded word to use.
It is not an unfair word for if you... They were made public in the trial. The email exchanges and the voicemail exchanges between the journalist involved and my ex-wife, I think it's a fair adjective. But you can look and judge that for yourself.
You went to prison. How was that?
Well, it's an extremely grueling experience, whatever one says about it. I mean, the Sun likes to refer to open prisons as a Savoy of slammers and so forth. Reality is you lose your freedom, and it's an enormous punishment. And there's no doubt about that whatsoever.
How did you pass the time?
Well, different ways, but one of the things which I always try and do in any circumstances is to be as active as possible. But of course, in an open prison, one of the things that people forget is the whole point of open prisons is that they're usually at the end of quite long sentences for people who've committed murder and so forth, and people work in open prisons. So there is actually, you're working 40 hours a week, and you're quite tired. And a lot of the old lags who've been in the prison system where they don't have to work get to an open prison.
What sort of work were you doing?
I was working in DHL, which was a packing outfit, basically picking things like tobacco and so forth for other prisoners in 17 prisons, and then putting them in packages and sending them out.
Did you read while you were there?
Oh, yes, I did, yeah.
What did you read?
I read some Balzac, I read some Hilary Mantel, and I thought, reading Hilary Mantel, that it was absolutely splendid that I had been a disgraced minister in the 21st century rather than a Tudor one, because my head would probably have been on a spike at the Tower of London.
It's quite a grand comparison to make. You think, looking back on it, it was probably a good thing you didn't get the leadership of your party, wasn't it?
Well, history is a sort of curious business, isn't it? Because there are all sorts of turning points. I mean, as it happens, I began the affair that I began after I had lost the leadership. So, you know, who knows?
It's all Nick Clegg's fault.
No, I don't think it's anybody's fault except my own. And all I was trying to do in the Guardian article is that, you know, running commentary on these things, to say that this is a newspaper group which has enormous interests, and it is prepared to defend them very brutally on occasion. And, you know, if somebody has a weakness, it will go for it, and that's fine. And it was my own weakness that created the problems, and I entirely accept my responsibility. But don't underestimate the fact that here is a newspaper group which has enormous power, and every time it's got more powerful, every time Rupert Murdoch has got another political concession from the government of the day, it's become more difficult to resist.
And coming back to you, is your political career over for good? Ever?
Yeah. I mean, the reality is that you cannot conceivably run, in my view, you know, having done what I've done. So my political career is over.